Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar, Protective Factors that Support Transition, the benefits of supporting the little transitions in a young child's life. Thank you for attending today. My name's Sandy Clark and I'm really pleased to be here with you. I'm going to be hosting this webinar with my colleague Nikki and also Maria Curtis, who will be working behind the scenes. In addition, we have wonderful tech support, so if you've got any sound or connection issues, please let them know in the chat and they'll be able to assist you. KidsMatter is funded by the Department of Health and Beyond Blue. Early Childhood Australia is partnering with Beyond Blue and in the school context with Headspace to support early learning services in schools in implementing the KidsMatter framework and undertaking the professional learning that goes along with it. So I wonder, is your school or service registered and participating in KidsMatter? If not, and you'd like to register, there's a link now in the chat that you can use that will take you to a short registration form, which really encourage you to do. If you are registered, the good news is that our webinars support your progress through the professional learning. And we have got further webinars about to be released over the coming months. If you're not sure if you're registered or if you'd like some more information, please just ask us in the chat. You can also email us at kidsmatter@earlychildhood.org.au and a consultant will get back to you. Feel free to ask any questions about participation and what's involved with growing healthy minds and wellbeing in the chat. And to get back to today, protective factors that support transition, the benefits of supporting the little transitions in a young child's life, Nikki and I will be reflecting about building protective factors for mental health into the transitions, both little and big, that young children experience. And I will pass over to her now.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Sandy. I'd just like to acknowledge tonight that the traditional lands that we meet on today and acknowledge the traditional custodians of that land. And we are all obviously gathered across the country on different lands. I'm blessed enough to be here on Kaurna land. It's incredibly important to think about this at all times, but particularly we remind ourselves that it is actually Reconciliation Week. And this year's theme is Don't Keep History a Mystery. So we're reminded that there is a lot to uncover, discuss, and reconcile in regard to the history for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here in Australia. And tonight we're here to talk about transitions, which is really relevant to think about the forcible removal and movement and transition of young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children away from family, language, land, kin, and their culture, and how that's actually experienced and how it's impacting Australia today. So I ask for all of us to think about how we can be personally responsible and professionally to reconcile this particular transition in young people's lives.
Coming onto our screen at the moment are ways for today. Each of these ways represents a way that guides our participation. We're all here today to consider, learn and reflect about early childhood wellbeing and education. We also need to keep ourselves safe and create a safe space today. A sense of safety is a foundational requirement for positive mental health, for a sense of security and performing relationships. It means that people are safe to be who they are and able to work to their strengths, able to express their opinions and beliefs and feel heard and respected, even when there are opposing views. So please share only what you feel comfortable sharing via the chat. Be mindful in your responses to others and observe confidentiality in any stories you might share. The other aspect of safety today is looking after yourself, which is really important. Please remember to take care of yourselves as we talk about mental health today. As we think and learn and talk, be aware of the feelings that you might experience. Sometimes unexpected feelings can emerge, even difficult ones. So have a plan, make sure to talk or yarn with someone who can help, and if you need to, seek professional support. We'll put a link to some of that support in the chat. And I guess another reason for taking care of ourselves is recognising that children learn from what adults do around them. Being aware of how to look after ourselves and support each other can make a huge difference to each of us, to the wellbeing of our team and to the children in our care. And as a final note, positive and supportive relationships are protective factors and are integral in creating positive transitions, which is what today's webinar is all about. So, on to the learning outcomes, and you can see here that the learning outcomes for today are to understand the influence of transitions on children's mental health and wellbeing, our little transitions influence big transitions, and protective factors for transitions. Recognise that everyone's at different stages of their learning and career, so some of this information might not be new to you, some it might be, and we encourage you to reflect on where you're at with your understanding and use the chat box to share your stories. We're also going to be taking some polls and look forward to your contribution towards the learning outcomes for today's webinar. Little transitions are the building blocks of big transitions. Transition represents a movement and a change that can play a significant part in the life of any child, adult, school and service. In fact, transitions are happening all around us throughout our lives. They signify the end of one thing and the beginning of something else. And in relation to children, when we use the word transition, we often think about big transitions for children, such as transition to school. Have you ever had a parent very early on in the year come to you and chat about their child's readiness for school? They may ask, what are you doing to prepare my child for school? What do you or would you say to them? Often I think we talk in terms of experiences, activities and orientation processes that we're providing or planning. We might talk about the benefits of children and play. I wonder how many of us chat with parents about the effect of the building blocks of little transitions that have been accumulated over the life of the child so far. What do you think? From my experience, this doesn't flow off the tongue so easily. Being able to put some language to these building blocks, these little transitions, and these little transitions can include things such as getting in and out of the car, to come into the service or school, arrival time, moving from inside to outside, moving onto the mat for story time, departure time. This might assist us both in our work with children and with their parents. Much is written and shared about the impact on children and their preparation for big transitions like the transition to primary school. And we certainly recognise that this occurs at different ages in different states and territories. What we now understand is that all transitions, no matter how big or little, have the potential to impact a child by either providing a protective or a risk factor for their mental health and wellbeing. And what we'd like to unpack with you today is how these little transitions, these everyday occurrences that a child experiences on a regular basis, can be used to provide a protective factor for a child's mental health and wellbeing.
Thanks so much, Sandy. So what we're looking at here is the idea of the risk and protective framework, and a way to think about, as we said at the start in the outcomes of this session, to think about how transitions can actually serve as a protective factor in children's mental health and well-being. Is the intention that we want is that transitions do no harm, that they actually do good for children. But it's all part of that bigger picture. You know, the status of our mental health affects all of our functioning. It affects our skills and dispositions that we develop slowly through those repeat experiences. So, and we think about that they therefore help us to think about how we approach life and learning additionally. So keeping healthy and happy involves all of our mental health. It also means that what we wanted to provide is a protective factor to strengthen a child's mental health experience. And a sort of, in essence, a buffer. So a buffer of things like what's sometimes called bounce back ability, if you've heard that term. And some of us have it and some of us don't. And when we do have it, it's often because of the experiences that we've had in early childhood. Experiences around things such as transition, and change, and being able to make mistakes, try new things, try again, negotiate, compromise. All those skills are learned in really good, supported little transitions that prepare us for what's happening next. It's important that we think about things such as feelings in transitions being acknowledged and embraced. They're being held by the adults around the child. So it means things like not stopping feelings, not hushing, the sadness that comes from farewell or separation, but accepting it and staying in it so that children can learn to regulate, to recover, that things don't last forever. It's really important. And in the same way, that risk factors, we remember, are not a predictor of poor mental health. Everybody has risk factors. Sorry, Maria, I am not yet there. And in the same way, we think about all of the ideas of those little stresses. So little stresses are not a negative thing. They're in fact not a risk factor. They're the ways that we start to understand and learn about the world. We're supported to understand what's happening. Like, why am I feeling this way? Why is this so hard? Why don't I want to move on to the next activity? And what can I do about that? How can I let people know how I'm feeling, and do that in a way that's really helpful? I'm ready now. This is my favourite poster. I really resonate with this poster of this nest created by a diverse group of people holding these two people in the middle, this image in the middle. It's absolutely my favourite. We know that things are constantly shifting and changing for children, and what we know is the way that we cope with shifts and changes is through relationship. So they're at the heart of this. Of course, we've got to go through change, and of course we have to transition from getting out of bed in the morning, to getting ready to go to care or go to our setting, to say farewell, knowing we're going to say farewell each time. All of those things we live through because we're people who are doing things. But if those are done around in a system that's uncertain and unpredictable and not stable, then the experience of them can certainly create a risk factor for children's mental health. What we can do is we can help them through those little transitions, so that they know that through their behaviour they're telling us how they're thinking, how they're feeling, and what they're asking of us. And what they're asking of us is exactly what this image is showing. You can't stop change from happening to me. You can't stop me going through the arrival of a new baby, or you needing to go back to work, or us moving house, or the loss of a family pet. But what you can do is help me to understand it, stay with me in the feeling as I go through it, and provide for me a secure base, which is often the parent's role, or is the parent's first the parent's role, that secure base, which comes from the circle of security, and therefore that the child can then come to their setting and make use of that as well, make use of feelings of safety and security, to have things explained to them, to have things become more predictable, and easier to go along with as they're shifting and changing. And that's, I guess, the question. What helps buffer or ease those transitions? Having a secure base to return to means that children can come to understand that thoughts and feelings and events and interactions, that they come and go, that things do change, but however, there is always a secure base to go back to. I can happily and safely go out into the world, experience change, make a mistake, and then I can also go back into that predictable, secure base and safe haven. I think we're getting ready for our first poll now, so Sandy's going to join us again. So what we're going to ask ourselves is what helps you, meaning you out there, with the little transitions during the day. What are the sorts of things that you help to ease yourself and buffer yourself through those little transitions? So you'll see a poll now on the screen, and you have a little bit of time there to to fill out the sorts of things that help you as you're going along. And yes, I guess I can ask you now if there's something that in particular that you do to help you out with your transitions.
Sorry, I just took myself off mute and was looking at that very first one about a cup of tea. A cup of tea is great. Yep, would have about 6 a day. But in fact, yeah, use a variety of things, and it depends on the time of the day. And sometimes, yeah, have to relook at it and change things when other things are going on. Often when I'm at work and I'm transitioning from one activity to the other, I try to take like a mindful moment between activities and just breathe mindfully for about 30 seconds before moving on to the next thing. And that's a really good way of just resetting. Also, remember a talk I heard from Adam Fraser about the third space. The first space is about what you're doing now, and the second space is about what you're about to do. So the third space is that space in between, and in particular talked about the space between work and home. And having just shifted to a new office this week, I'm really enjoying my bus trip and walk home because it's given me an opportunity really just to reflect on the day and reset for when I walk through the door at home.
That's nice. So you're a tea woman and I'm definitely a coffee woman. But coffee's not really what eases me through transitions. I think you're right. It's about, for me, it's also about mindfulness and flexibility, which you talked about as well, like being able to, you know, cope when something doesn't happen as I expect it to. So on your bus trip home, if you don't get a seat and you spend your whole trip standing up, that can be not as restful and not as good a transition as perhaps if you get to. I was remembering I don't currently work with children directly. I have 3 of my own, but I was remembering when I did work directly with children, and I used to need that time on the way home to download and debrief with myself. Okay, I didn't talk to anybody else, just me. But also to have a chance to not be asked anything of me. Like I would be needing to think, nobody needs me right now but myself, and I can just be in this moment because I really need nobody to be asking me to help them right now because I want to get home and be able to help there. Like I need to not help. I just need to think about myself.
Very good strategy, yeah. So I think we're on to the next slide, actually. Little transitions. Just looking, if there was a slide, little transitions from the beginning. Having a look for it. Yeah, I wonder if we're moving on from that, perhaps. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyhow, let's think about why changes in infancy and early childhood are different from changes in later childhood and as adults, which is what we've just been, I guess, having the chance to think about and reflect on as adults. Certainly as adults, we experience many changes and transitions on a daily basis, but we use our language, our previous experience and our knowledge, and we can make predictions on what that change is going to be like. Things such as going to work in the morning, what it means and what our reactions might be. So we can build in strategies to help us adjust and cope. And even then, there are many changes that are very stressful and that we have difficulty with. I mentioned that I just shifted office this week. So part of this transition to work in the morning is quite new for me. Even with a bit of research and using all my previous experiences, it's still new and still a change to many of my other routines. So if we think about infancy and early childhood, everything is so new, everything is happening for the first time, and young children don't have that previous knowledge and experience to draw on. And you'll see that the quote on your screen from Pam Linke, where she says, the younger children are, the more new things there are in their lives, the more changes they have to cope with. She also says the most change occurs in the earliest weeks and months of a child's life, which all makes good sense. Thinking about the first time for anything can be a bit scary, and that's what is happening with young children on a regular basis. Small things such as loud noises and being picked up suddenly may be stressful as they haven't experienced these things before. Bruce Perry says that even a nappy change can cause a stress response. And if we think about it, the infant has large people pushing them around and has no language to understand and no previous experience to predict what is going to happen. So we need to consider that everyday happenings may be new changes in children's lives and be aware of how these transitions are affecting a child's state of well-being. And the research tells us that what happens in the early years, early months really, can have a profound and lasting effect on its infant's development. So positive experiences of change in the early years sets the foundation for future changes that a child will encounter. This is a quote from Robin Dolby, and I think she sums it up really well. And she says, the task of the educator is to be physically predictable and emotionally available. Outcome 1 of the early years learning framework, that children have a strong sense of identity, states that children feel safe, secure and supported and use effective routines to help make predictable transitions smoothly. So we can see the link between providing for and supporting transitions as a building block to supporting a child's positive sense of identity, which is a protective factor for children's mental health and well-being. How can we assist children to cope with the changes they will encounter? Well, we can help children by making transitions as positive and stress-free as possible, and by helping children learn to cope with changes. Referring back to Bruce Perry again and the early years learning framework, they indicate that supporting children to transition well means providing transitions that are nurturing, predictable, repetitive, gradual and attuned to the child's developmental stage. What are our goals for transition? About managing and organising a child's feelings as they move from one setting to another or one activity to another. And also about providing an opportunity for connection and development of respectful relationships with the educator. You'll often hear early childhood people say it's all about the relationships. And indeed, children learn through relationships in their lives. This includes transitions. We can view transitions from a relationship perspective rather than a procedure for getting from one activity to another or from one setting to another. We know that children usually cope better with change when they're in the care of adults who are sensitive and responsive and know them well. So educators have the opportunity to observe, reflect and plan for transitions within their service and provide positive, secure and inclusive transitions for each child. This is reflected in the National Quality Standard, and in particular, we can look to quality areas 1, about educational program and practice, 5, about relationships with children, and 6, collaborative partnerships with families and communities to support these ideas about transitions. What we would like to see is children experiencing a range of positive and secure transitions throughout the day, where they're feeling secure, confident and included.
Look at that little graphic there. the child moving back and forth along the continuum. So what we're seeing here is this idea that children have different responses to transitions. So and that they sort of exist on this potential continuum. So on one end we've got the keep it sane children, and perhaps you work with some children that you could describe like that. Let's also remember, as we've already spoken about several times tonight, that we also probably sit on somewhere on this continuum too. So generally there's children who are the keep it the same, or the children, they react to even the smallest shifts, like a new food on their plate or a new person sitting next to them, or a slight change in the environment or the routine. So, you know, they thrive on that order and predictability. They need a lot of time to adjust, and often they're the ones who are telling us, no, 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 a lot of time to adjust, and often they're the ones who are telling us, no, 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 until they are ready for that. They might find it harder to regulate their emotions because they are triggered by such small changes. And their upsets can often happen at times that we as adults can't predict it, and we're surprised by it as well. Then there's the take it in their stride children. So we've got them sitting at the other side of the continuum. They tend to find things, new things are exciting, they're enjoyable, they're curious, and they want to get involved with them. They're happy when it starts to rain unexpectedly, and they go about doing what they wanted to do anyway through the rain, perhaps. They tend to be babies or young children that engage really readily as well, and I'm sure you can see that this potentially fits with, you know, personality or dispositions, or somebody's nature. We talk about, you know, how natured people are. So they have positive responses to most people that they meet, and they do well in most environments, a lot of watching and wondering. But most children, as we know on any continuum, sort of fall somewhere in the middle. You know, they have an easy time when educators change, but maybe a new food is upsetting to them, or what we thought we were having for lunch is not what's turned out today. What's really important about this is to think about putting ourselves in the children's shoes, to be able to see transition from their perspective, to be able to see change from their perspective. Because as we're reminded, and as we're seeing in the chat, you know, we know that actually there are so many transitions, little transitions for children as the day follows along. Like every minute to minute, things can be happening to them that are considered by them as a transition or a change or a shift, and that they're trying to cope with each of them as they flow from each other. So what we're going to see now is we're going to have a think about Zach and his response to his arrival time at kindergarten. So we had the story of Zach. When you got your link to logging onto the webinar, you're encouraged to have a look at the story of Zach. I think we're going to give people a little bit of time to have a look at Zach's story. The story of, you know, an everyday arrival at kindergarten and what happens between the educator, Zach, and his father. So I guess it'd be great if people who have had a look at this story and had an opportunity could put some responses in the chat about what helped Zach transition when he arrives in the morning. Like when you think about that story, and from your own practice, of course, what do you think is actually really helpful that the educator does, that the parent does, and the way that Zach responds to that? There's also obviously some things that are in, like some structure in place in regard to the service and how they think about this separation, perhaps, that you'll see or you'll think about and read about. And while we're waiting for the things to come through from the chat, I guess I'd really love to ask Sandy what she thinks about this. Anything you noticed in particular, Sandy, that the story makes you think about?
Well, actually, Nikki, I was just having a look at the chat, and there's quite a lot there about...
Oh, good. I can see it coming through for me now.
Yeah, just getting down to the, down to Zach's level, the fact that he has something to share, the educator's interaction with Zach, connecting and showing interest, certainly, yeah, because there was obviously a lot of interest shown, and three-way conversation between Zach and his father and the educator as well.
Absolutely.
And so that, and I guess that connection between educators and family, and showing how important that is, and how important it is in helping Zach feel comfortable, and that this is a place that he belongs as well.
Yeah. They have those really nice expectations about what happens, and I noticed Leanne's put that in the chat, encouraging him to use his self-help skills and place his bag on his hook. So he has that predictable, reliable routine of welcome in, and his dad actually, will be like, we've got things to do when we get to kindy. Like you've got these important tasks to have.
Get a sense. Sorry, the calmness and structure as well. It's a lovely, relaxed feeling, and even just reading it as it's written down like that, just really get a sense of the place as well. Yeah.
Roxanne makes a comment about that, saying the educator and parent both allow him the time to separate in a non-threatening manner. I mean, absolutely, you wouldn't. Separation is such a big deal. Like, saying goodbye is such a big deal. So if you're with adults who respect that and understand that this is not something necessarily to be hurried, but that all children do it differently, right? Like, not all children need the same things at separation.
That's right. Yeah. And it does indicate that, they both know Zach well, and they've taken the time to really know and appreciate him too. It's a funny, enjoyable activity when he was ready to say goodbye. Yeah, that was the last one.
Absolutely. Yeah, from Lisa. Yeah.
So
I think
lots
that's the thing.
Lots of different things, isn't it?
It is. And it's all of those things in combination, done really well and really smoothly, but undoubtedly take time sometimes to know. Separations are not always smooth, even with the best intentions. So it's not about always getting transitions right, whatever that means. It's about doing with good intentions, thinking about that. Yeah. When he shows his obvious pride, the educator supports him. Yeah. I think that's the thing as well. How many times will we be tempted to say, oh, put your cards away, or we don't bring personal items here, or, put them back in your bag. But instead, there's just that little opening of relationship. Like, that might be the rule, and it might need to come later. But for now, we're using it as a connection to say, look at those important cards that are so important to you, but you've bought them to also show them to us. Really nice. Thank you, everybody, so much for this this response in the chat. It's really wonderful. Yes, we will. We see Amelia's made a comment in the chat, which is actually for the next section of the story, the case study story. So we'll draw on that, Amelia, when we see it next.
Look, as you mentioned just before, Nikki, it's not like this. Not all children respond like Zach. Okay, coming into a school or a service can be quite daunting for some children, regardless of their age as well. And we've been thinking about what was it that helped to make a smooth transition for Zach. And some of the things, I guess, that we're going to go on and look at in a bit more detail. When we think about what's going on for the child, I really like the metaphor from Glenn Cooper from the Circle of Security that he uses. And he looks at the start transitions at the beginning of the day with a metaphor about two little rowboats, which I'm just going to quote briefly. He says, the child steps out of his parents' rowboat into the rowboat of the educator. The problem for the child is that there is a moment where they have one foot in each boat. And if the boats drift apart, they get stuck. or when the children come in and they're not quite sure whether they're in the school boat or in the parent's boat, they get stuck. What we want for the children is to know that the parent and the educator are in charge and that they are going to take care of this. I think it's a gorgeous quote, and really illustrates it in such a really vivid way as well. As we want children to experience a seamless transition where the child goes from feeling secure with the parent to feeling secure with the educator. The keep it the same children that Nikki referred to before might need some preparation from home or planning by educators to help them get used to the idea. Children know that they'll need to say goodbye in the morning, and being prepared by knowing who will welcome them and what will be expected of them when they enter the building can be helpful. So just thinking of some strategies that might assist this, and it would be great to hear from you in the chat as well if you've got some strategies too. Or thinking that maybe the parents could have a photo of the building and the educators for the child to look at as they travel to the service in the morning. Having an experience or an activity that the child enjoys doing already set up, and we saw that there with the model dinosaurs with Zach. And this can be better than just free play for some children. Understanding that the child may need time with only one educator rather than being directed to an activity with other children. Respecting that some children might need time by themselves when their parents have gone, but they'd really appreciate a sensitive adult nearby or someone who checks in with them regularly with a smile or a wave. And it may be that the educator might be doing something else or be with another child, but just letting them know that the child, that they're there and that they have the child in mind. Having an adult there to interpret feelings, saying things like, I can see this is really hard for you, or I can see this makes you really upset. An adult to take charge in a calm, predictable, reassuring way that supports both parent and child. And generally just demonstrating a working relationship with parents assists children to feel relaxed. And once again, I think that was really well illustrated in that example with Zach. You can see from those sorts of strategies, and I haven't had a chance to have a look at the chat yet, but as educators, our role is to understand each individual child, what they're saying to us through their behaviour and what they're thinking and feeling. And look, they may be thinking, I don't feel safe, I don't know what's going on, I don't know what's expected of me. And they might be feeling anxious or scared, sad, frustrated, confused. But all of this will give us an insight into what would support a smooth transition. So the child who finds it difficult to transition at arrival time might also be finding the physical layout of the room or the environment too hurried or too noisy or too large. And I think this slide here is a good illustration. How does the child feel when they're at the beginning of that corridor? So thinking about the distance, just for a second. Just think about the distance that a child needs to walk on the car park to the foyer and then into their room. Thinking about whether there's space in the room for a quiet place where parents and children can sit, read together, and have some time to regulate their emotions. We also need to think about how many little transitions has that child already experienced before they left home. What was it like for them to get up, get dressed, have breakfast? How many times that morning did they have to leave their own plans and fit in with someone else? I think these are things that we often forget or haven't thought about, but they can be helpful to reflect on as we gain an understanding of being in a child's shoes. Hello again, Nikki.
Hi.
So
we just lost your sound a little bit at the end there, Sandy.
Oh,
introduced this one.
All right.
That's okay. Just when you introduce this new slide.
We're looking at transitions during the day, and we were going to really look at this as a bit of a poll. There's a very short example up there, and it may resonate with some of you too. Maybe just the situation is slightly difficult, but thinking about what are some of the possible reasons for this child's behaviour. Okay, so people are starting to think about some of the reasons why it's going on here. I think with situations like this, we can see why some transitions are stressful for both children and for the educator as well. And it may be that we think that some of these transitions are quite insignificant, but not necessarily to the child. And sometimes it's just a bit of tweaking of practice that can make a huge difference for the child. And we see what that, yeah, maybe she does need more warning to anticipate the transition.
Yeah, that seems to be the most common response coming out. And of course we don't know, but we're just speculating, but surely preparation is key. Remembering that preparation looks different potentially for children than it does for us as adults as well, you know. And we have lots of really good strategies for warning or signals, you know, ringing a bell and banging on a tambourine or telling them 5 minutes till pack up or whatever it is. But sometimes those things are not experienced by children as really being preparation for what's going to happen next. And the lead time can be a lot longer, remembering that 5 minutes when you're a young child is, you know, can be an eternity, or, you know, it could be really incredibly short.
Yeah. And I think with some children, they need, Dan Siegel talks about connect and redirect. And so for some children, they need some extra relationship support. She's taking the time to go and spend some time with her before asking her to move on, and showing interest in what she's doing, and yes, having some time with her, and really knowing which children that might apply to as well.
I see in the
chat.
I think we'll both go into the chat. Tina said she thinks that the child, the girl in the case study, could be affected by all of the reasons, but would also have something that might have even happened before she arrived. Like she's already positioned as finding it hard. Yeah. Sometimes we set children up in transitions as well. Like we set them up to fail. We don't intend to, but we don't do the things that we could do to make that success happen. So maybe we're not responsive to the morning that the child has had. You know, we have our routine, which is we pack up now, but we're like, today we're not going to push that. Today we're going to go slower, or we're not going to expect a great deal of independence. And Amanda said that as well. Getting down, she said in her service, she often gets down to the child's level and shows them a visual cue. So often for children who have special rights, we might be using those type of cues like a Compic or something, but actually all children benefit from those scheduling understandings, or being able to connect the words we're saying to, you know, thinking about what the actual action is. Like I keep hearing them say pack up, but I haven't yet worked out what I'm then supposed to do. And as adults, we're thinking, we pack up all the time. I can still remember an educator I worked with once saying to me, like, they started last week and every day we pack up, so they should know by now. And I remember saying, well, you know, like I'm really old, which I was at the time, you know, younger than I am now, but still old. And I said, and I still don't get onto the task that I should, you know, when I get home. So perhaps we do need to think about the fact that we need to keep practicing, and be helped.
And also, do children understand the words that we're saying? And if you just say pack up, that may mean absolutely nothing to some children. Yeah,
absolutely.
I also wonder, looking at that short that's there, are the transitions always necessary? Do they actually allow children enough time to be involved and to finish off activities? And what are we actually saying and valuing if we're moving them on all the time, and if they're being interrupted in what they're doing all the time? And so I think it's, and particularly if there's transitions that are really difficult all the time, and as you were telling me a really good story about sleep times, Nikki, we need to think maybe it's the actual transition which is the problem, and just rethinking about it and thinking, just because we've always been doing it, do we have to keep doing it this way?
Absolutely.
Is it meeting the needs of the children as well? There's been a bit about...
I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, Shona. She's put a nice thing in the chat saying, avoid giving the child a choice if there isn't a choice. And I think that's a really good point. It's even in our language, like, would you like to pack up now? And the child says no. And you put yourself in a position where you're like, well, we do need to do some level of packing up. So it's not really a choice. And I had that in my notes, Shona, too, to think about that. Choice, not choice. Sort of in charge adult, not in charge. Yeah.
And I think children can take their lead from educators too. Like, just the way educators talk, if it's in a calm and clear voice and not rushing around, then children do model how they respond, and take their cue from the educators quite often too. So it's good to think about what is it that I'm role modelling as well.
Absolutely.
So, look, I think looking at it, I think just from the chat, everyone's covered quite a bit. So we'll move on to the next slide. And back to backstory as well, that the addition story about what happened. And you may like to have another look and read about it, because we would like to hear from you once again. But thinking about, once again, what is a transition? It's about stopping something and starting something else. Okay. And that needs emotional organisation. And it can be difficult for children, because it involves moving away from something they're engaged in to fit in with the next thing that's happening. It's something that we all do every day, and it's a skill that we all have to learn. So have we got any responses in the chat? So have we got any responses in the chat about, here we are, I sit with one of my girls at drop off and she cries for a couple of minutes and then she is often fine. I have tried everything. We can certainly see some of the things that we've talked about, well, everyone's talked about in the chat, happening in Zach's day, and often educators get children to pack away as part of a transition, but here the educator has used the opportunity to gather all the children around the dinosaur. It's just thinking about, we don't have to always do things the same way, and we see that the educator shows respect, shows interest in what the children have been doing. So.
Thanks so much, Sandy. Thank you for responding to that poll, everybody, and for thinking so deeply about what's happening for Zach. What we know, and this was mentioned before, and certainly coming through in the thread in the chat, is that sometimes the transitions go well and sometimes they don't go so well. But transition should always be an opportunity to build relationships. So Sandy used that idea, connect and redirect. So it's that idea that, you know, anything that happens during a transition is an opportunity for connection. So children seeking connection. Help me understand, listen to me, respect what I'm saying. And as we said in there, sometimes it's about this isn't a choice, and this is what I had in my notes here, Trina, that you brought up so beautifully before, is that, you know, sometimes things aren't a choice, and children can learn to understand the difference between, I have a choice here, I can actually decide what happens next, that sense of agency, you know, ability to make something happen and to impact their world. And sometimes I'm not in charge, and I need to, and that's a lot of the time, and I need to listen to what somebody else is helping me do or supporting me to do. And I think that's really important in this idea that it's got here on the slide, that, you know, things that children think we think are insignificant or may have a perception, like the educator that I was saying about before, a wonderful educator, but she had a perception that I've taught them once or twice that they should know how to do it by now. And pushing that independence, like packing up the task you children do, well, actually, sometimes it's a task we do together, because sometimes you simply don't know what to do to get the task going, or you do need some help. I don't know if you guys have ever done a big clear out. You know, like everybody went through this stage where they were doing the KonMari technique, and they were clearing out their entire houses. And it's overwhelming, that idea of, look at this huge mess I've made, and I don't know where to start. So why not help out in that, you know? Why not be supportive and helpful? Why not prepare children? Really good preparation. Why not help them understand the purpose of transition? What is going to happen next? Why do we need to pack up? And often that is what we're doing in really good early childhood practice, is saying, you know, we're packing up our things because we need to take care of them and we want them to be here when we come back. How often do we give children the ability to return to a task? If they really can't leave it, we have so many ways at our disposal to be able to return to it. And people were talking in the chat about that sort of thing, photos and stories going from home to care. You know, taking a photo of the dinosaur, if we do have to put the blocks away, which they, you know, Zach didn't in the story, but, you know, but how can we actually record that memory so that can be returned to another day? And showing understanding and compassion. You can't stop change. You can't stop transition. We do need to go home. I do need to go to work. But what we can do is show compassion and understanding in how children are coping with what's happening around them. So this is the final part of Zach's story. It's about the departing, and the departing from the service, leaving his child centre and going home. And in the story, he goes home with his mother. He arrives with his father and he goes home with his mother. What do you guys think actually supports him in his preparation to leave? How has that helped along the way, do you think? It is most definitely another sort of transition, and children can cope with it in different ways. I'm sure you're familiar with the child who doesn't run up to greet their parent or their caregiver when they arrive, and is more likely to run to the back of the yard, and it's not that they're not happy, it's potentially that little transitions has built to this big transition. I was preparing, I've been waiting for you. Now the reality is you're actually here, and I'm having a big feeling about it. And that happens, you know, to lots of children, to feel differently about that getting back together. So in the analogy that Sandy used so beautifully before, which comes from, you know, the circle of security, is the two boats. So I'm stepping from one boat to the next, and it's not always easy. As much as I want to get into that other boat, it's not always that smooth to come in. You know, I'm tired, or, you know, whatever it is that's happening. So Robin Dobby also talks about this really beautifully, about, you know, thinking about ways that we can prepare children. So her idea is, I'm just looking in the chat. Yeah, Mum took time to show interest in the important things and being able to share his excitement. She acknowledges him and takes time to actively listen, support and recognition of his creation as a partnership. She gets lots of really beautiful feedback. It's not rushed when he's not given the feeling that this is not valued and important. And it's like there's a space created, which is kind of what Sandy was talking about before, the third space, you know, where we're not together again and we're not apart, but we're going through this reuniting moment and we're not rushing it, we're doing it. Not everyone can take a gentle getting back together. So it's about thinking about how you can do that the best you can, knowing that each family is different and each child is different. Keeping transitions predictable but responsive. I'm really aware of the time that we've got left together today, so we'll pop through this slide. It's a fine balance between having transitions and keeping them thoughtful, but not having them turn into things that stifle us. You know, this is how we do it. It's that idea of being able to think about how to be responsive within them without making them so predictable that we say, oh, that's what we've always done. We're no longer reflective or responsive to actually what's shifting and changing about what's going on around us. So it's always continuing to be reflective in the practices that we have during our little transitions throughout the day.
Thanks, Nikki. And as the slide says here, you feel good when you feel connected. To make transitions comfortable, safe and secure, help children feel they belong to people and to a place. And as we come to the end of this webinar for today, just inviting you to reflect on transitions within your own service and what opportunities can you see to further develop relationships during transition times for children in your service? And what is your one takeaway message from today that you might focus on in the coming week? You know, how might this impact on your work? We'd love to hear, so please share it in the chat if you'd like to. I was going to ask you, Nikki, if you have a takeaway message from today.
Thanks, Sandy. I do. I mean, I have so many that I think about, but I guess the core of it is that even though we do talk about relationships a lot in early childhood, that they are at the core of good transitions, and also that we think about those two perspectives, that children have a perspective on transition and so too do adults. So the way that we respond to change and to you know, our own transitions and change and moving and shifting definitely impacts how we interact with children about it, and it also impacts the way that we behave around the actual concept of transition. So if we are negative or, you know, concerned about it, we probably bring that into our work with children. We might even say things we don't mean to during transitions or changes that might suggest to children that they're bad rather than that they're learning. Here's another learning that's happening for us.
Thank you very much, Nikki. And yeah, I can't see any up there, so I hope that you will all take something back with you that will make a difference in how you think about and go about transitions in your service. I think just on it certainly makes me reconsider all the time just how many transitions there are in a child's life, and really appreciate just how often children have to move from one thing to another. And also just that idea of taking time and planning for transitions. And on that note, we'll move on to the last slide, and just like to take the opportunity to thank everyone for all their participation and involvement this evening. These webinars are a great way to learn and reflect and to think about putting learning into action. But they also demonstrate your individual commitment to continued professional development, which is so fundamental to helping improve practice. For those of you who are with a registered school or service, contact your consultants and let them know what you've learned and acted on after this event. It could be all that you need to complete one of the professional learning topics and receive a certificate. And you could also book into one of the national check-in events to share what you've learned and done. If your school or service isn't a registered participating service, it's as simple as completing a short online form and getting started. Just don't forget to mention that you've participated in this event. And like I said, you can also contact our team. So once again, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for sharing in the chat and in the polls, and we look forward to seeing you online again. We would really appreciate it if you could fill out the survey as we value your feedback. And I'd like to finally thank all the support team for making the webinar happen today. So good night to everyone. Thank you and safe travels.